This presentation covers how witnessing violence can affect children. My name is Stacy Kunkel, and I'm the Deputy Director here at S.A.F.E Place. We're going to go over S.A.F.E Place's children's services, including counseling, advocacy, resources, and referrals, including assistance with schools, enrollment, and advocacy, our playroom and holiday events, safe sleep practices, and expectations for clients staying in shelter, how we can talk to and support caregivers, informing staff of concerns and CPS reporting procedures, how domestic violence can affect children versus how nurturing children can promote growth and development, trauma and adverse childhood experiences, and teen dating violence. At S.A.F.E Place, we offer all services free of charge, including counseling for adults and children. We provide assistance with school enrollment and transportation requests, which we'll go into further. And it is a condition for children staying at S.A.F.E Place to be enrolled and attending full-time to be able to stay in the shelter. We have a playroom. We offer tutoring and homework help, organized activities, holiday events, parties, birthdays. We provide advocacy and support with CPS and prevention education in the schools. Our playroom is open when a volunteer, intern, or staff member are available to supervise, or parents staying in shelter can request to unlock the playroom and supervise their own children at any time, except during quiet hours. So while it is locked when no one is in there, it can be unlocked at any time by a parent or staff or volunteer. And we ask that when it's being supervised by a volunteer or staff member, that only 5 children per volunteer are in the playroom at a time unless there is a group activity occurring. So if it's just free play, we do ask that we limit it to 5 children per adult in there. The playroom is also not very big, so it's good to limit, and we do it by hour time slots so that if there are a number of children wanting to engage, that everyone can have a chance to do so. We have sign-in sheets that if you are volunteering or working to open the playroom, we ask that any time that is offered, even if no children participate, that you keep track with a sign-in sheet of the date and time of when it was open or the activity that was offered, and submit those to the children's advocate at the end of your shift. A general rule for shelter to keep kids safe is that children cannot be alone in shelter. So it's on us to make sure that if we have them in the playroom while their parents are, doing whatever they need to do in the building, whether that be meeting with an advocate or a counselor, making dinner, taking a nap, whatever they need to do, that when the child is done in the playroom, that we directly hand them off to their parent or caregiver. We do not just send children out on their own to return. We want to make sure there's a direct handoff. And a note about the playroom is that parents, caregivers do have to remain on site at S.A.F.E Place when their children are in the playroom. They can't leave property. We ask that toys from the playroom remain in the playroom, and that no matter who opens it, they make sure that it's cleaned up after each use, of course, encouraging kids to help. But at the end of the day, whoever opened the playroom, whether that be staff, volunteer, or a parent, is responsible for making sure it's left in the way that they found it. If at any time you are running the playroom and you feel overwhelmed or have an issue, there's a phone in there, so you can call to the resource center or another staff member to ask for assistance, and someone can come help you with that. The playroom is a really great opportunity for kids to not only engage and have things to do and have a little bit of normalcy and fun, but to give the parents a break and be able to get some things done that they need to get done, because shelter is a lot different than being at home. They have to have their kids with them at all times unless we do have the playroom opened and supervised by a staff or volunteer. So I think the parents probably appreciate it just as much as the kids do, if not more. We offer a lot of events and parties and fun activities at S.A.F.E Place for clients staying in shelter. We have welcome bags and lots of supplies, including brand new toys and things that we can give out at intake to make sure that if children come and don't have what they need or just need a few things to make them feel at home, that we can provide all of that. So always feel free to give things out to kids. We have plenty, and that's what it's there for. We provide school supplies and backpacks, so we do that at the beginning of the school year. We make sure every child staying in shelter has what they need for school, including if teachers send out a list of things that they need for the classroom for the year, we try to make sure we have everything from that list so that kids staying in shelter don't have to be singled out or things like that for not having what their teacher asked them to have. So if we don't get it donated, which usually we do get all of those things donated from various places in the community, we do go out and purchase those things on a case-by-case basis. So for example, we had a teenager who needed a graphing calculator for pre-calculus, and so that was something one of our grants was able to purchase so that that child could have their own graphing calculator and not have to borrow one at school or that type of thing. We also will have plenty of backpacks and school supplies to give out throughout the year. So if kids come anytime and they need anything for school, we are happy to give that to them. We know that kids might come and not be able, they might not have had time to grab their backpack. They may have come and never had what they needed for school. So it's not our call to determine, how much or what they might need. We have plenty and we're happy to give that out when they need it. We provide Easter baskets, Halloween costumes, Christmas and holiday gifts, birthday gifts, ingredients for parents to make cakes for their kids for their birthdays, celebratory gifts. So an example is we had a teenager in shelter who received some school awards at school, acknowledgement for his academic achievement and success, and his mom wanted to celebrate him, so we were able to put together a little gift package and make up a certificate just to kind of reinforce that his family at Safe Place was very proud of him as well. And really any additional gifts are provided at the parents' requests. We receive a very high number of donations for our children's program specifically, and in the 10 years I've been at Safe Place, I've never experienced a time where we had to deny a request because we didn't have enough or felt that we were running too low on something to be able to give it out. So if that's the least we can do to help kids feel supported and get through a really difficult time in their lives, we are more than happy to do that. And we always tell clients if we don't have something that they need, to please tell one of us so that we can determine if it is something we could stock or get, or like that graphing calculator, because a lot of times, especially related to children, there is a way we might be able to purchase something like that. So always let staff know if you receive a request from a client and it's not something we have down in the storage room or in the attic, and we'll do our best to see if that's something we can help with or find a community resource for it. But we try to make sure that kids at Safe Place get to experience all of the fun things that kids staying in their homes might get to experience when it comes to holidays and parties and things like that. School enrollment with Safe Place. So as I mentioned in the beginning, children are required to be enrolled in school. That's a federal condition of staying in a shelter, is that you have to be enrolled in school. We do give a grace period, certainly, because we know that it's not always easy depending on when you come in and, if you have all your documents versus if you had to leave with nothing, or we've had survivors who don't have the required documents due to immigration status. So we always meet survivors where they're at, and as long as they're actively working on it and working with our survivor advocates to move forward in that process, we're not going to ask someone to leave. Typical situations where someone may be asked to leave are when there's just a refusal to enroll their children in any of the options provided, or their children are enrolled but they're not attending and they're not sick or have other issues happening that would prevent them from going. Those are when it can become an issue, but that is anytime we're enforcing one of our policies around being able to stay in shelter. We do our best to offer a lot of support, a lot of conversation around what are the barriers. So that's the same with school. So it would start with a conversation with the survivor advocate to identify what the barriers are, what sort of assistance Safe Place can provide, and kind of see where we can go from there. So there is not a cut and dry time period, but we try to say, that you're at least starting the process of enrollment within 3 business days of staying in shelter. The schools that our school district is Battle Creek Public Schools, based on the shelter. But there is a law that provides rights and services to children experiencing homelessness. So children staying in our shelter are technically homeless because we are a shelter. So they are protected by the McKinney-Vento Act, which kind of opens up some opportunities for them to support them while they're in this transitional phase. So as the description outlines, those that are homeless, don't have housing, staying in a hotel, campground, shelter, sleeping in the car, that kind of thing, have additional rights, including being able to stay in the same school even if they move and receiving transportation to that school as long as it's in the student's best interest, which I'll go back to in just a second. Enrolling in school immediately without documents that schools typically will require. So as I mentioned with that one, a lot of times survivors and their kids may be coming to shelter without anything, or didn't have a chance because of safety or whatnot to grab all of the items that they might need. And so part of our job is to ensure that the students are being treated fairly under this law, and that those documents don't necessarily hold them up from getting enrolled. Our survivor advocates handle school enrollment, and they coordinate with liaisons at the various schools. Each school has an identified person who coordinates with youth that are homeless, but a lot of times it does take some advocacy and support to ensure that the law is being followed properly and that the kids are getting the support that they need. Additional rights are receiving free school meals, getting help with school supplies and other needs. There is extra support if the youth is on their own, which is not typically the case at Safe Place, and assistance helping connecting children to early childhood services. So as far as transportation, that's one that our survivor advocates have to assist clients with the most, I would say, beyond just school enrollment in general. It is part of this act that the school will provide transportation to the student, as long as they're in a shelter if they're staying in the shelter in the county that covers the school. So for example, we are in Calhoun County. The school district that Safe Place is in is Battle Creek Public Schools. But if we had a family staying in shelter who were from Marshall that is in Calhoun County, Safe Place is the shelter for Calhoun County. So Marshall would be required to provide transportation to the kids from Safe Place to whatever school they go to in Marshall. And that transportation doesn't have to be a bus necessarily. It can be, but a lot of times what we've seen for when it's between cities is maybe there's a teacher who lives in the area near Safe Place, and they could pick the kids up and take them to school on their way to school. Maybe multiple buses have to coordinate to, drop the kids at a drop-off point to be picked up by the Marshall bus. It could be gas cards for the parent if the parent has transportation, that type of thing. So it is on the school, the child's home school, as long as they were already enrolled in that school when they came to shelter, that they assist them with finding transportation from Safe Place to that school. Now, it is a different scenario when, say, we might get a survivor that came from out of state and they're enrolling their children in school and they just want to have their kids attend a school that's not in our district. So using Marshall again, if they were not already enrolled in Marshall when they came to stay at Safe Place, they don't qualify to get that transportation. Certainly, we can still see if there's help and advocate for them, but that's not covered in the law because they were not current students at that school at the time of coming to shelter. The goal of the law is to help have some sort of stability and support for children who are facing homelessness, so that their schooling is not interrupted. As with all of us, schools tend to be short-staffed and don't have a lot of resources. So sometimes it does take that extra advocacy from the survivor advocates to coordinate with the liaisons at the school to ensure that there's a mutual understanding that it is the school's responsibility to pick the kiddos up from Safe Place. And a lot of times survivors appreciate that assistance because they are not always heard when they go to the schools to say, these are our rights and that type of thing. So if you're ever working with a client in shelter who is having trouble with transportation to school or any school issues really, you would refer them to one of our survivor advocates for assistance with that. Again, going back to school services, our children's advocate does offer tutoring and homework assistance at Safe Place, and our survivor advocates will assist with advocacy and for individualized education plans or IEPs. So the difference, we have a children's advocate who is more for the hands-on things with the kids. So opening the playroom, doing activities, organizing holiday events, that type of thing, kind of the fun things with kids, and the tutoring and homework assistance, which maybe the kids don't consider fun. And then our survivor advocates assist with more of the advocacy piece with the parents. So, advocacy and support with school enrollment, with finding childcare or childcare assistance, successful living while at Safe Place, things like that. So that's the distinction between the roles, but really it's on all of us to support the kids staying at Safe Place, which we'll go into more in a little bit. As I mentioned, and I'm sure will be mentioned in other trainings, we offer counseling that is free by licensed therapists. So our counseling is for youth that have been exposed to intimate partner violence between their current or former caregivers, or for teens who have experienced domestic violence, intimate partner violence themselves. So topics can include domestic violence education, feeling identification, coping skills, safety planning, and when working with especially younger children, we typically use trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which includes a trauma narrative, and that is an outlined therapy approach that's proven to be very successful with kids who have been exposed to trauma, for a structured way to support them through that process, support them through understanding trauma and feelings identification and how that can impact us, all the way through processing the traumatic experience or experiences with their non-abusive caregiver. So typically at the kind of completion of TFCBT, there's a trauma narrative, which can be that, any kind of format. So a story, the child can make a book, write a poem. Kids have done different dances or artistic expressions, that type of thing. And they and their counselor share that with the non-abusive parent, as kind of a way to promote processing and healing and that relationship building with the non-abusive parent. That takes a lot of time, and so what we always tell parents is that counseling is a marathon, not a sprint, with children. And a lot of times what we'll see is the kiddos staying in shelter might get a little more short-term counseling. They, of course, are welcome to come back even when they're not staying in shelter for continued counseling services. But often when we're seeing kids in shelter, it's more short-term while they're there. And then the longer-term children tend to be those non-residents whose parent brings them for an ongoing basis. So we do have a variety. It looks different every time. We tend to say 5 and up for kids, but we will make exceptions based on the type of trauma, based on the child's abilities. There can be a 4-year-old who cognitively is more advanced than a 7-year-old. So it is truly case by case. So, if you ever have any questions, just go ahead and refer them to our clinical coordinator for her to evaluate, next steps and if they qualify. But typically 5 is a good cutoff for when a child might be ready to start engaging in counseling. At Safe Place, we do promote safe sleep practices while making sure that we always take into account any cultural considerations and come from a place of respect. During your work at Safe Place, you will get more in-depth training on safe sleep practices and how to work with parents and caregivers on promoting safe sleep. So this is just kind of a brief overview since we're on the topic of children. So I sleep safest alone on my back and in my crib, or pack and play in our case. And the idea is, alone, so no loose bedding, stuffed animals, pillows, that kind of thing in the bed or the crib or pack and play. A newer Safe Place guideline is, a newer safe sleep guideline is no reclined rockers. That was a more recent there was a recall on quite a few of those. So those are those reclined rockers that people would use for the child to sleep in for longer periods, and found to be a risk for the child to roll over or suffocate or that kind of thing. So we don't provide any reclined rockers at Safe Place. What we do provide is a brand new pack and play for every family that needs one in shelter, and that way they can take that pack and play with them when they're done or when they're leaving Safe Place. We provide sleep slacks and swaddles to promote not having any loose blankets or things like that in with the baby. And then we provide toddler beds once the child is over 1 year old. The biggest thing we promote is always remembering to be supportive and respectful of any cultural considerations around parenting and sleep practices. So while we definitely encourage all of these practices, at the end of the day, as long as the parent is not engaging in anything that would be a CPS issue, we certainly expect that we can provide the information and options and the items that they might need to promote safe sleep. But at the end of the day, it is that parent's choice. So a lot of cultures engage in bed sharing, things like that, and that is not our place to make that call for the family. And so really we want to come from a space of, okay, if that's what is right for your family, what can we do to assist you with that? What can we provide you? What support do you need, if any? And then that is where the conversation ends for safe sleep. Now, again, if we do observe something that's putting the child at risk, we can certainly intervene. So an example, we've seen where parents we have twin beds for adults and older children, and maybe we see a baby, sleeping face down on a bed with a bunch of items and right at the edge of the bed with no barrier or anything for the baby to not fall on the floor. So that would be an opportunity for staff to offer, do we need a bed rail? What do we need to assist that family with following safe sleep? It's not something folks would be exited from shelter, again, unless it became an ongoing, repeated issue of the child's safety is at risk and a CPS concern. And that's something that we always talk through as a team to make sure that we're not just passing our own judgments or what we believe is best, and that it actually is something that's putting the child in danger. Again, you'll receive more training on that, but just to touch on it briefly in this one. Talking to parents and caregivers is something that we want to make sure we're coming from a place of respect and understanding, and knowing that at the end of the day, we want to promote that the parents know best for their children. So there are effective and ineffective ways we can approach this with families. So some examples of ineffective ways we might ask someone about anything related to their children would be, why wouldn't you want to send your children to school? Taking that approach of, it's free childcare. What's wrong with you that you don't want to get them signed up and coming out, if the child's not in school? Don't you know that you're not supposed to co-sleep with your baby in the bed? You need to have your child in a car seat. We shouldn't be telling survivors ever what they need to do. And I'm sure even if you do not have children yourself, you can imagine how you would respond if someone were to talk to you this way about your children. So again, coming from respect and support and trying to gain understanding, because a lot of times with our clients, there is a very valid reason that they might be doing something that we could take as being unsafe or neglectful, but really it's just that there might be additional barriers that we haven't thought of, or needs that we could actually just support the client with getting, and then everybody will be good to go. So ways that we do want to approach issues like this are, let's look at this together. Are there any safety concerns or transportation barriers that are preventing your child from attending school? So going back to common reasons people might not have their children enrolled in school is that maybe they don't know their rights. Maybe they don't know about McKinney-Vento. Not many people do unless, they work in this field and engage with it frequently. Maybe the parent is just so traumatized from what they've just escaped and coming to a shelter and all of the things that are changing in their life that they just don't have the mental capacity to sit down at a computer and fill out a half-hour long application. So maybe, an advocate can sit down with them and do that with them and help kind of ease that burden for them. So really looking at what are barriers, and again, a lot of times it is that transportation piece and not knowing their rights to have assistance with that. Have you heard about safe sleep practices? What can we do to support you in keeping your child safe while they're asleep? Have you gotten a pack and play yet? Would you like a sleep sack? Those kinds of things, offering both support ideas and items that we can promote safety with. I see that your child is not in a car seat. Can I help you get connected with resources to obtain one? And some situations like this, we might have to, share with them if that we continue to see you leaving without having your child in a car seat. We'll have to report it to law enforcement and CPS because it is a safety issue. So it's not to say we won't ever do anything about if there's an ongoing safety issue, but it's definitely better to come at it from a place of learning about what the barriers are and what we can do before just immediately going to threatening them. Because a lot of times it's something as easy as we might have a car seat we can give them, or we might be able to go buy one or give them a gift card to go purchase one, or find a community resource instead of coming from a place of threatening them that they won't have a place to live just because they don't have the means to get a car seat right then. And I'm sure you can think about different methods of communication and how people in general respond versus, when they're feeling respected and supported versus when they're feeling attacked and judged. So it's just kind of always something to be cognizant of, not just when you're talking to parents and caregivers about their kids, but just in general. Anytime you're working with a survivor, we don't know what they've been through. We don't know what's going on in their life. We don't know if mentally they're in a place to even have a conversation about it. So let's explore that together with them and how we can work with them rather than be one more system that is working against them. And I think I've said this probably 10 plus times, but I think it's good to repeat things that are worth repeating and that we want to make sure that we remember as we do our work at Safe Place. So be respectful, identify barriers, be mindful of passing judgment and biases, offer opportunities for self-determination, and find ways that you can help empower the client and find their own voice, their own ideas to determine what's right for them and their family. When to inform an advocate about children in shelter. So again, our survivor advocates, the survivor advocate and survivor advocacy coordinator do more of the hands-on advocacy support and follow-up for certain issues related to children. So if you work or volunteer in an area where you might witness some of these things, it's always helpful to pass along information. Because we are a 24-hour operation and none of us see everything that happens or are aware of issues, concerns, needs, that type of thing. So if you noticed children from a particular family are often unsupervised even after multiple attempts by shelter advocates or other staff or volunteers to, respectfully remind the parent and discuss why it's important and that type of thing. If the children are still unsupervised, letting the advocate know. An immediate notice to the advocate is if the parent leaves property without their children, if they leave them in the building We don't allow babysitting by anyone. So if the parent is not on property, the children or child should not be on property. That's including, and this can happen a lot just timing wise, and we understand, but when kids get dropped off by the school bus, sometimes that can fluctuate a little bit on time. And so sometimes the child might get there before the parent gets back. Certainly, we're not going to call CPS right away or, react that quickly, but we will ask that child to stay in the resource center until their parent gets back and call the parent, call the emergency contact if we have a release of information to make sure that it's not that we quickly respond to that need. So that is immediately letting an advocate know or an on-call staff know if there's a child with no adult on property. If you become aware of children being physically disciplined while in shelter, so again, we respect parents' rights to parent their child, including spanking and those types of things, again, that don't fall into that CPS reporting guideline. But at Safe Place, because we have survivors and children who are fleeing violence, we do not want to expose them to additional violence. So our advocates will work with parents to identify alternate methods for disciplining and supervising their children for while they're staying in shelter, and that is something you can let them know if you witness that. If you notice that children are not at school during regular school hours and you don't have any information that would suggest that they're sick or staying home for just a day or that kind of thing, if it's an ongoing thing that you notice that kids are hanging out at the shelter during school hours, please let the advocate know so that they can follow up to see what the issue is, if the child is in school, is enrolled, or just isn't attending, and support the parent in getting their kiddo back to school. If you haven't seen a child in shelter for several days, so this happens where a child might come to shelter with their parent, and then parent decides that they are going to have their kid go stay with, their aunt while parent is in shelter, just to not have to have their child in a shelter. Perfectly fine. We just need to know for funding reporting reasons who is staying in the shelter each night, so that we don't inaccurately report more kids or people that are staying than what actually are. So if you feel like it's been a while since you've seen a particular kid, maybe you can always ask the parent, hey, is so-and-so still staying here? But you can let one of the survivor advocates know about that. Any suspicions about abuse or neglect, those need to be communicated immediately to either the survivor advocates if they're there or the on-call staff, so that we can determine if we need to make a CPS report, if we need to respond immediately, that type of thing. If a parent is requesting counseling, you would refer them to the clinical coordinator, and then tutoring or like individualized activities would go to our children's advocate. And then any safety concerns for the child, so examples of not having a car seat, not practicing safe sleep techniques, things that again are going to be a supportive conversation, those would go to the survivor advocates to provide that follow-up. while we ask shelter advocates and others to intervene in the moment on some of the issues, we do like to try to, if it's not something that needs to be addressed right that second, we like to have our survivor advocates follow up, because typically they have a rapport with the client. They're who the client works with on an ongoing basis for all their needs. So we prefer to have them have those maybe more challenging or sensitive conversations and provide that follow up. Some signs that a CPS report may need to be made include physical marks, any time of sexual misconduct, including sexting. So if an adult caregiver is sexting with the child, that does fall under sexual misconduct. Neglect of basic needs, inadequate supervision, neglecting medical or mental health needs, things like that. If the client, so examples with physical marks, if the child has a bump on its head, which is often the case with toddlers and older babies, and parent says, oh my gosh, they just bumped into the wall and now they have this bruise on their head. That is not a CPS issue. That was an accidental bump on the head. Now, if a child comes in for an intake with their parent and they have bruising on their back, and parent shares that the abuser assaulted the child, that is an immediate report to CPS. So always err on the side of caution and have that conversation with your supervisor or an on-call staff if it's after hours or weekends. No one at S.A.F.E Place makes a CPS report without talking through it with someone else. Making a CPS report is a big deal. It has a great impact on people's lives. And even if we feel like it's a pretty cut and dry situation that needs to be reported, we still want to make sure we're talking through that with someone before we make that report. But that does need to be done immediately. So again, if it's after hours, evenings, weekends, that kind of thing, there's always an on-call staff available that you can call, have that conversation with, and determine what the next steps are. So if you determine that the next step is to make a CPS report, CPS wants to hear the report from the person who received the information. So you will call centralized intake, or there is an option to create an online profile to file the report. You can do either, whatever you're more comfortable with doing. And if you do call it in, you do have to complete it's called a 3200. We have copies in the resource center, and fax that into centralized intake. The advantage of doing the report online is that you don't have to do that additional step afterwards. Advantage of doing it over the phone is, of course, it's a little more of a conversation rather than trying to summarize it in just a paragraph or that type of thing. So you can determine what is best for you. But your supervisor will support you through that, or the on-call staff, in making sure that gets reported. We do try to include the non-abusive parent as much as we can, as long as it doesn't pose a safety risk in making that report, whether they want to make it with us, whether it's just notifying them that we do have to do that. But we don't want it to be a surprise to someone who is not at risk of, fleeing or that kind of thing. We also try to empower the survivor themselves to make reports if they have the information themselves too, and support them through that. It is scary for someone to even hear the word CPS involving their kids, whether they were involved in the abuse or neglect themselves, or it was someone else. So this is a case where we want to be sensitive. We want to make sure we give the survivor that space and privacy as we navigate through that together. And provide that ongoing support. And once you make the report, it is up to CPS if they will investigate. And if we made the report from S.A.F.E Place, CPS is permitted to come to S.A.F.E Place. If we have a CPS worker show up who says, I'm here to meet with so-and-so or to check on so-and-so, and S.A.F.E Place was not engaged in making the report, we do need a release of information before we would release anything on that survivor. Even when we make the report, we want to get a release if we can, but that is the time where we are, one of the very few times where we are able to violate confidentiality if the survivor is not willing to engage with CPS. We are all considered mandated reporters by working at a domestic violence agency, and we just encourage that you always talk that through with somebody before making that report. This is a version of the How Violence Affects Children's wheel from the Duluth model. It is very similar to the power and control wheel that you have seen in other sessions for survivors. So this is how that trickles down to affect children exposed to domestic violence. So starting at the top with emotional abuse, children might doubt reality, have a strong fear of doing wrong. They've experienced inconsistent limits and expectations by caregivers. They might be afraid to express their feelings, might be having challenges at school or difficulties with low self-esteem. These are a lot of things that our counselors work on with kids and process through with them. Moving to physical and mental effects, kids may feel guilt and shame. They might blame themselves. We see that one a lot. Especially if the child disclosed things and had to talk to CPS or the police or that type of thing, or if they were involved. There's a lot of blame there of that they had to tell on, their abuser, or the abuser might also tell them that it's their fault, that they don't get to see them, or that they went to jail, or that type of thing. They may regress to earlier stages of development. So we see this a lot of times with kids that maybe have been potty trained and then they come to shelter and now all of a sudden they're having accidents. That is completely normal. They might become demanding or withdrawn, cranky, grumpy, they might start getting reports by teacher that the child's very grumpy and disengaged. And just as with adults, anytime any of us go through something, especially a trauma, we're not going to be our best selves. And so that goes back to that advocacy and support piece of advocating with the schools, maybe talk if the parent wants to sign a release or have a conversation with teachers or support systems at the school, to really focus on here's what's happening in this child's life, how can we be supporting and understanding and help the child be successful as they navigate this. Sexual abuse, so the child, if they experience sexual abuse or were exposed to sexual abuse, we've worked with kids who have seen their non-abusive parent be sexually abused in front of them. They might feel shame about their body, feel threatened or fearful of their own sexuality. They might learn inappropriate sexual talk, behavior. They may have had access to porn or magazines, movies, things like that that are above developmentally appropriate. You might see them act out on other children if they've experienced sexual abuse or witnessed sexual abuse. And that is definitely a clear sign for a CPS report if we identify a child engaging in those types of behaviors. Children very, very rarely would engage in any such behavior or even know about any such behavior unless they've experienced it themselves or witnessed it. So that is one of those red flags that sticks out that, something needs to be done immediately. Abusers will use children, so put the children in the middle of the fights. Children may end up taking on roles and responsibilities of parents and give up being kids. We'll see them be more mature than maybe they should be, or taking on responsibilities that, especially coming into shelter, you might see an older child almost co-parenting with a non-abusive parent. If there's younger kids, they just kind of step into that role to serve, they go into survival mode to help do whatever the family needs done. Children seen and not heard, so not, kids might not be used to having their voices heard. Asking them to take sides, that type of thing. We see a lot of where the abuser may try to manipulate the child by, offering them gifts or things like that, promising things I'll get you a puppy if you tell mom that you want to come live with me, or that type of thing. And it can be a really challenging place, and we'll go into it more, but typically, especially if it's the child's parent, they still love and care about that person, even if they're being abusive and putting them in the middle and things like that. So it can be very challenging for the child to navigate that, and for the non-abusive parent to support the child through that and not overshare with their child of what they're going through. The abuser might utilize threats, so learn to manipulate because of their own safety issues due to effects of violence in their family. They might express their anger in a way that's violent, abusive, or they don't express it at all because they're not allowed to feel angry. They might have gotten in trouble for expressing any feelings or acting out or that type of thing. Sexual stereotyping, so they might either copy the abuser's dominant and abusive behavior, or kind of copy the victim, being more passive and submissive, and have kind of feelings of not being able to express themselves, feeling shut down. And that is why it's important to intervene as soon as it's known that there's an issue, and educate. And that's another reason that it's important for prevention education in schools, so that kids who are experiencing these things realize that that is not healthy or normal, so that we can intervene at an early age and hopefully avoid those possibilities of them either becoming abusive themselves or being victimized themselves. Abusers will use intimidation by putting the children in fear. They might use looks, actions, gestures. They might smash things, destroy property. So same with the victim themselves, do things where maybe I don't have to actually hit or physically hurt you to make you feel terrified of me. I'll punch the wall, or I'll slam your favorite toy against the wall, that kind of thing, and make them afraid for their physical safety without even having to touch them. Children exposed to violence might experience a lot of isolation, might have a difficulty with developing social skills. They might feel alone or different, like they're the only kids going through this, especially staying in a shelter. They might not have been able to have friends over because they have to hide the violence and keep secrets. They might not be very trusting of adults in general, because if they've witnessed, an adult in their life who is supposed to be their protector, caregiver, supporter, be abusive and hurt them or their non-abusive caregiver, that can put a lot of mistrust in adults. And we as service providers and schools and places like that interact with kids, sometimes I think we forget that and assume that a child should just trust us because of our role in their life. But it's on us to really earn that trust and build that rapport with the children, so that they feel safe and supported, and not expect that from them. Isolation, I think, is a big one for both the victim and the kids, because as it mentions, not being able to have friends or family over, but they kind of might live in this little bubble of just their family, the abuser, the non-abusive parent, and the kids. And so coming to shelter disrupts that whole bubble, and that can be really hard for them to adjust to, and then not know how to engage with others, even in shelter, with other families and that type of thing. The nurturing children wheel is kind of the opposite of the abuse wheel, just as the power and control wheel has the healthy relationship wheel to show here's how we can nurture and support our children for them to thrive and be successful. So promoting emotional security, and these are things that we can help support and educate the non-abusive parent on, of here are strategies, here's what we can do to try to combat this, what these kids have been through, and how you can do this together with your child. So talking and acting so that children feel safe and comfortable expressing themselves, be dependable, be gentle. Providing physical security, so providing those basic needs, meeting their need for food, shelter, clothing, teaching personal hygiene, nutrition, monitor their safety, maintaining a routine, tending to wounds, injuries, not being dismissive of a child's needs, that type of thing, providing consistent discipline, ensuring rules are age appropriate and developmentally appropriate. We'll see that a lot with abusers, where they have expectations that are much more beyond what the age or developmental level of the child is. And then the child will be punished if they don't meet those expectations. So being consistent with rules that are age appropriate, being clear about limits and expectations, and use discipline to instruct, not just to punish. Giving time, so participating in your children's lives, their activities, sports, events, celebrations, knowing who their friends are, just taking an interest in their day. Include children in your own activities and revealing who you are. So, not going so far as to treating children like your friend and, talking about all the issues that you've had with your abuser, but being very real with your children about how you're doing and being vulnerable and showing your own feelings and expressing emotions in a healthy way in front of children can all build them up and help them to learn how to do those things. Children learn better by seeing it displayed correctly to them from a parent, caregiver, adult in their life than just being told these things. Support and encourage, so be affirming, encourage children to follow their own interests. Let your children know it's okay to disagree with you. Doesn't mean that they don't have to still do what you've asked them to do as their parent, but that it's okay, to have differing opinions, things like that. Because with abusers, it's often, my way or the highway, and kids get used to just being submissive and not, some kids might not even really know how they feel or what they think about things because they're so used to just being dismissed. Recognize and acknowledge any improvements, teach skills and allow them to make mistakes, show them it's okay to make mistakes. Abusers tend to expect people to be perfect and to, never mess up, so show them that that's okay. And the benefits of learning from our mistakes, giving affection, so expressing verbal and physical affection, and then being affection when your children are ready emotionally and physically to receive that affection. And that's for adults and kids. Coming from abuse or traumatic situations, you might not be ready to receive that type of affection. So making sure that we're asking for permission, we're making sure people are ready. And that's why we don't tend to, hug or that kind of thing with kids or adults unless they initiate that hug first. And if they do, teaching, asking for permission and that type of thing. Both for body safety, but also just respecting people's boundaries. I love to point this one out to survivors, especially in counseling, that here on the Nurturing Children wheel, where it's about ways to take care of our kids, that it has a whole section on taking care of yourself, because that emphasizes the need to care for yourself. A lot of times parents are very selfless and they think that I can sacrifice everything, it doesn't matter what I have to sacrifice or what I have to go through to make sure my kids are getting what they need, which is good to an extent. But if you are not caring for your own needs, eventually that will trickle down to your children. So give yourself personal time. That's where the playroom comes in really handy to be able to give survivors that time to themselves, give them a break. Keep yourself healthy, physically, mentally, all those good things. Maintain friendships and accept love. Love doesn't have to come from a romantic relationship. So it can be accepting love from your children, accepting love from friends, supporters, that type of thing, which can be challenging for survivors coming from abuse, but showing them that it's okay to accept love and that there is healthy love. And it's okay to set boundaries when the love is not healthy. The last one being trust and respect. So acknowledging children's right to have their own feelings, opinions, friends, activities, promote their independence, allow for healthy privacy. So again, we're not saying don't monitor children's activities or ensure that they're engaging in safe behaviors, especially with technology and that kind of thing. But, age-appropriate privacy can help the child feel respected and build that trust between the non-abusive caregiver and the child, respecting their feelings for the other parent. So, as challenging as it can be for a survivor to hear that their child still loves their abuser and that type of thing, just validating that they might miss the person, validating they might want to spend time with them, and not shutting that down or, having the attitude of, why would you want to spend time with with them, they did this, and this to us. That's why we're in this shelter. Why would you want to go, have time with them? Keeping all of those personal feelings and responses out of the child's life. And that's where counseling for the adults can be very beneficial, to have a space to process through that, because rightfully so, they're going to have a lot of feelings, but it's not the children's responsibility to manage those and take those on themselves. The best thing a child can have is that unconditional support to discover their own thoughts, feelings, and opinions on the abuser, so that they can make their own decisions moving forward to the best of their ability as a child. Obviously, things like custody and whatnot come into play, but letting them develop their own opinions is very important. And then believing your children, so believing, their reality, their how they remember things, how they see things, and validating that experience is very helpful to promote nurturing children. At S.A.F.E Place, working with children exposed to trauma, we see a lot of co-occurring traumas. These are some common ones we see on a daily basis, but there are certainly, the list goes on and on. But so homelessness, so if they're staying in the shelter, that automatically, is a co-occurring trauma. A lot of times, even if they're not staying in shelter, their life has still been uprooted. So maybe staying with a family member and moving out quickly, maybe going from, a nice big house to a small apartment, that type of thing. We see children who have experienced sexual assault. There's police, legal, CPS involvement, all these systems in place that we work with to try to promote a collaborative approach to supporting survivors and their children, but certainly all systems that can re-traumatize survivors and their kids as well. Children experiencing bullying at school, so that can be for a number of things, but we see it a lot more even with our shelter clients, because now, maybe the bully at school finds out that they're homeless or that they're staying in a shelter or that kind of thing. So the list, it just adds to that list of things they might be bullied for. Grief over the loss of the relationship with the abusive parent, potentially. Grief of, their life completely changing. Maybe they had to move, so grieving the loss of friends and normalcy and that kind of thing. Being exposed to parental addictions. We know that substance use is a common way survivors might cope when they feel like they have no way out or no way to escape the physical or mental pain. So children can be exposed to that and experiencing their parents navigating that. Mental health issues, both for kids and their caregivers, suicidal thoughts, suicide itself. Abusers will often threaten suicide to try to stop their partners from leaving. And then poverty, so, lack of being able to get their needs met, those basic needs met, as I mentioned in the Nurturing Children's Wheel, so access to food and shelter and clothing and their needs. Those things can all kind of compound to make things even more challenging for kids. I'm just going to briefly touch on adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, because I know we go into it much deeper in another training, but just kind of to summarize how all of these different types of traumas and things that can happen to a child can impact their development. So, if you look at household challenges, we can see mother treated violently at 13%. You can see abuse and neglect and all the things that come into play there, how all these things can impact. But the thing we want to remember with all of these is that children can be successful and resilient when they receive the support that they need and have that strong relationship with a non-abusive caregiver and other safe, healthy adults in their lives. So it is not the non-abusive parent's fault if the child was exposed to things that, if they were being abused and their child was exposed to it. We want to look at how we as a community can support them in getting free of that and having the support in place to be able to move forward from that, and not holding that against the parent. We see that a lot with CPS, with failure to protect, which In certain extreme cases, yes, that can be something that at some point, as a parent, you have to step in. But a lot of times with domestic violence, the parent is doing, whatever they're doing everything they can to survive and to keep their children safe. And we know that sometimes in that moment, staying with the abuser might be safer than leaving if the abuser has threatened to kill them, has, the means to kill them and things like that. So there are so many factors that come into, as we'll go into in other trainings, why someone doesn't leave. And those are things that often systems that our survivors might encounter don't always take into effect. So that goes back to how can we advocate and educate and support our partners in responding appropriately to domestic violence and not re-traumatizing victims and their kids when they're working with these systems. Some differences between children and adults and how they experience things, how we might engage with them. Children might not even know why they're at the shelter or utilizing services. So we want to be careful in how we talk with them, especially younger kids. They might not have a full understanding of what's happening, and that is not our place to inform them. Rapport building tends to take much, much longer with children versus adults. So I mentioned before kind of building that trust. And in counseling, we talk about that a lot, that, for example, with counseling, an adult comes to counseling, they might be nervous and skeptical, but they know why they're there. They know what the point of counseling is. They know that this person's trained to talk with them. So there is a level of trust there already just in the person and their role typically. But with kids, they might not even know what counseling is. They don't have the cognitive ability to really comprehend, okay, I'm here because I was exposed to violence, so this person is someone I need to talk with through this, and we're going to work through this together. They're just not at that age developmentally to be able to handle all of that information. So it's important that we meet them where they're at and know that we've got to work a lot harder to build the rapport with kids. It's typically pretty easy with the kids we work with, because if you take an interest in their life, if you help them meet their needs, support them, be respectful of them and their non-abusive parent, a lot of times just doing that over time builds that rapport pretty easily. They might be afraid to get others in trouble, like I said, with like CPS or police or that kind of thing, if they share what's happened to them. A lot of kids know about CPS to an extent. They know what can happen if they talk to someone like that about, an adult that's hurt them or that type of thing. And that's very scary for them. They might have mixed emotions about the situation. They love the person that hurts their non-abusive parent. And some societal views and normalcy of generational trauma. So it's a very confusing time for children to process through the missing of that person and the anger or sadness of what they went through because of that person. They're maybe staying in a shelter now because of that person. Again, this is another area adults don't do well with mixed emotions. So it's certainly very challenging for kids. And the younger the child is, this is where you'll see a lot of like acting out and that kind of thing, because they just don't know what to do with it and how to talk about it. Family roles may influence the child's perspective of the situation. They may feel pressured to protect siblings and the non-abusive parent. And this is where I was talking about that pseudo-maturity. So, the teenager kind of being the co-parent when they're in shelter to help with the younger kids. Again, a lot of times that's necessary for survival, and that it's just kind of the way it is. But making sure that we do what we can as supporters of the family to provide that child with time to be a kid, through one-on-one time or opening the playroom for the younger kids so they can have time alone just like the parent, and helping kind of identify roles and how we can support there. And then going back to counseling, even in children's counseling, we focus more on play and drawings versus just discussion. We get a lot further with kids when we do things that are interesting and engaging to them, meeting them where they're at, and working through things at their pace. Some warning signs that I have touched on, but I'll go through again, and these definitely are not all of them, but extreme behaviors, trouble concentrating at school, changes in appetite, difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep, frequent nightmares, trouble remembering what has happened, like details of the event, just as with adults, when we go to fight, flight, freeze, it can make it challenging to remember details of that or be inconsistent in our details of that event. They may avoid people, places, or things that are associated with the event or the abuse that occurred. They might feel scared and just not really know why, and they might have physical health and complaints. So we've seen kids in shelter who, are complaining of frequent headaches or stomach aches, and it's very important to get those checked out by a doctor for in case there is something physical happening. But a lot of times we see that it's something emotional, mental that they've experienced, and that it's manifesting itself physically in their body because they don't know how to talk about it. They don't know what to do with it. Here are some things. This is a checklist we've used in schools with teenagers to talk about teen dating violence. So again, this will go much deeper into teen dating violence in another training. But as I mentioned, we do work with teens who have been directly exposed to abuse themselves. And so this is a checklist to kind of see where someone might fall. And what we found is teens tend to be pretty surprised at how frequent people might engage and expose in these types of behaviors. So things like, your partner contacting you multiple times a day, always wanting to know what you're doing, getting very jealous. Those can come off as things that are loving and caring, but really, if we go through this checklist and we're seeing a lot of red flags, can actually mean that there's more going on, and they may be experiencing abuse. I like to end this training with this quote: "Children are not a distraction from more important work. They are the most important work." So at Safe Place, sometimes we can get in the mindset of that the children's advocate and the counselors are really those that work directly with the kids on a day-to-day basis. So they're the ones who are responsible for working with kids, but really it's on all of us. And the more that we can engage and show interest in children's lives, the more likely they're going to be successful and be able to get through that. So even if you're just walking through the building and the kids are getting off the school bus, asking them how their day was, you can see such a big difference in kids when an adult takes interest in their lives. And a lot of times those are the fun parts of our day where we can get a break from whatever we're doing, to maybe give out snacks after school, or, sit down with a kid for 5 minutes and color a picture or something like that. All of those things fall in all of our work. So never be afraid to engage with a child like that or take that time. It'll go a lot further than you probably realize. So when the shelter is full of kids and it's loud and crazy and there's a lot of things going on, I try to remember myself and to challenge each of us to think of what can we do to help engage those kids and help them feel supported and know that this is their space too, and that they're not just a disruption or a distraction, that they're being seen and heard.